My turn. Thank you. Is that on? Sorry. I've got a really croaky voice, so just let me know if you can't hear me. I've been in bed the last few days with a bad bug, so just excuse me if I'm a little bit wobbly, like Winnie the Pooh this morning. I'd first like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet here today and pay my respects to elders both past, present and future. I'd also like to thank Hugo and Dyslexic for having me here today, and also my mum who's come and my board members that have come to support as well. We're a little team at the moment travelling around the country wherever possible to spread the word of dyslexia for young people and adults. So today I've been invited to speak to you about my journey as a young adult emerging into an older adult. Is that what we said this morning, Mum? Morphing into an older adult at the moment, and to talk to you about how I've established the Dear Dyslexic Foundation, which is a platform to give young people and adults a voice, which is something that we haven't had in Australia before. So before I start, we had a hand up before about the number of adults here that are dyslexic or people that are dyslexic, but have we got parents here today as well? And then teachers, is that right? So I'd planned a presentation that talked about the workplace, but there's been some comments around dyslexic strengths that people have seen their children have, and also some of the things that Rhonda talked about. So I might deviate from my presentation just to talk about some of that stuff as well. But first, sorry, this is really not very clear, but what I wanted to talk about was my journey as a beautiful primary school student. This is me in grade 2. And at grade 2, I wish I had Rhonda's slide that showed the image of the graph, whereas the normal academic student progressing really well. There was no issues with my reading or writing or any of the subjects that I was doing. I was an extremely well-behaved student, and that was a trait that carried through all of my academic years, which I think was one of the reasons why I flew under the radar. But as I progressed from grade 3 onwards, there started to be signs that something wasn't right. So there were comments in my report cards that said that I needed to practice my times tables more, that I wasn't paying enough attention with my handwriting, that I needed more support with my spelling and my grammar. And so from grade 3 onwards, there was consistent messaging in maths and English classes that there's something wasn't right, but nobody had the opportunity or nobody realised at that time that that could possibly mean that I had dyslexia. This is me and some of the key support networks that I have, because being dyslexic, you need a lot of support to get through day to day. Because as Rhonda said, it is a reading disability. But I also have dysgraphia, which we were just talking about on the break, which is a writing disability. And so for me, having a strong support network is what's got me through to where I am today. I was diagnosed at the age of 27 when I went back to do my postgraduate studies. And prior to that, I had trained as a speech pathologist, and I'd gone back to do my Masters in Health Administration at the time. So throughout primary school and secondary school, there was nothing really that indicated that there was anything wrong. I hung out with the smart kids that helped me get through, and my mum edited all my work for me. And she would say to me, "Haven't you proofread and checked this?" And I'd say, "Yes, of course I have, Mum." And she'd go, "Okay, there's a lot of issues here," but she would fix them for me, and so we'd get on. And in the classroom, all my friends would help me. So they would check everything. As Rhonda said before, you'd work with those groups that kind of supported you in what you were doing. So again, nobody ever picked up that anything was wrong. But when I got into university, that's when the functional crisis that Rhonda talked about occurred. Speech pathology is not an easy degree. It's really hard to get into, and I got into it as a mature age student because I left school and I travelled the world and did a lot of other things and came home and was lucky enough to get into this course and thought, great, I'm really, really smart. I'd never been really smart at school, but now I was. And so for 4 years, I failed constantly. I struggled. I couldn't pronounce all the big words in speech pathology. There's a lot of them, let alone spell them. And I had tutors that helped me throughout. And again, I hung out with the smart kids that got me through. We had a lot of group work, so again, I was reliant on those groups to help me. And in the last semester of my 4th year, I was told that I wasn't going to pass my degree because they finally found out that I couldn't write. Sorry, at times I get emotional, even now. That I couldn't write, I shouldn't have passed secondary school, and I shouldn't have got through my degree. And I said to them, well, it's too late now. I'm here, and I'm not giving up. And I went home to my mum and I cried and said, what's going on? And for a lot of times I didn't know. I was always struggling, but nobody knew why I was struggling. And I just thought it was me, and that everybody happened to them like this, that letters moved on the page, that, you know, they didn't always spell right. And so I just thought it was a normal thing. And so I got through my graduate year and they passed me after having to spend an extra summer studying. And then I thought, it's okay now, I'm in the workplace. It doesn't matter that I can't spell those big words. It doesn't matter that I can't do grammar and spelling and I can't write like everyone else, because I'm out there working with patients and I'm going to be really good with patients. I know I am, because that's one of my strengths. But when I got into my graduate year, it was horrible. I was terribly bullied by my manager. I'd go home at night crying. I'd sit in the car after work crying because, again, I still wasn't doing everything that everyone else could do and I didn't know why. And in the end, my manager handed me over to a senior speechy that had joined and said, I want nothing more to do with her. She said she'd wish she'd never hired me. And in my last day, she refused to come to my going away party because she was so sick of me. She'd belittle me in front of other staff, and it was a horrible year. And so I left speech pathology for quite a while because of the way I was treated. After that, I went back to uni because that's what I didn't know what else to do. And it was there that I had a tutor that said, I think you're dyslexic and you should get assessed. And so I went and was assessed through La Trobe University and was diagnosed with a reading and writing disorder, or the common garden variety term is dyslexia and dysgraphia. And I didn't know what that was. Nobody knew what that was in my family. I was going through a terrible marriage at the time and my world fell apart and I fell into a deep, dark depression and anxiety for a number of years and was in and out of hospital. And it wasn't until I had this amazing support network, plus a good piece of pizza and some wine, that helped me get through the next couple of years to build my resilience back and to get to where I am today. And I put this photo in here. It's all of my family, and a number of us are dyslexic, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but also because it's at Locksport, and Gippsland holds a really special place in our family's hearts because we come down here a lot for our holidays. So my journey led me through to establish the Dyslexic Foundation, which I'll talk to you a bit about in a minute. But the journey for an adult can be really hard, especially if we're diagnosed at an older age. So for me to be here to talk to parents and teachers, you know, it's a really exciting time. My mum and I are talking about it in the car, that, you know, even though it's hard at the moment for children and what you're going through, if they've got the opportunities now to be assessed and have early interventions, then, you know, the opportunities in the future are a lot brighter than what's happened for a lot of young people now, adults that are going through that at the moment that I've gone through. So Rhonda's talked to you a lot about dyslexia, so I won't go through it all, but 1 in 10 of us have it, so that's a massive amount of the population that are facing these difficulties. As Rhonda said, it's lifelong neurologically based learning disability. It can run in families, so we think it's from my dad. We're 99% sure it's from our dad. He's very, very dyslexic. He has really, really poor literacy skills, but also he's extremely creative. And also one of my brothers and my nephew, so he was diagnosed at 5, so he's quite severely dyslexic. So I wanted to talk about dyslexia in the workplace today and some of the challenges that I've faced, but what we need to be looking at in the future to support young people and adults coming through, transitioning from higher education into the workplace. What we're finding is people are talking less and less to each other and more on their devices. Hopefully no one's on their phone right now, and I'm not boring you. But what we find is that we've never seen in society more than what we're seeing now, that we have to be communicating through the written form, whether it's through text messaging, whether it's through Facebook or social media if you want to be part of a community, or in the workplace where we're needing to have emails or writing reports. What we're finding, though, is research is saying that within Australia there's a lot of people still have low literacy skills. And out of 1 in 10 Australians, 2 to 3 of those have poor literacy skills, and their literacy skills are that low that they can't actually meet those demands of the texting or the demands that are out there at the moment for their work and their personal life. And there's even little research that's connecting that low literacy with those that have dyslexia, and then the discrimination that they can be facing within the workplace. So when we go into the transition into the workplace, if you're lucky enough to go to TAFE or university, definitely not in the school system. Sorry, my throat. We know at the moment in the schools it's hard to get intervention. There's no funding at all at the moment. When you go into TAFE or university, if you've got that piece of paper and you've had the diagnosis, which is extremely important, then in Victoria at least you're able to access funding support. So I'm doing my PhD at the moment in looking at dyslexia in the workplace and social and emotional wellbeing. So I'm able to get a disability coordinator, so that helps me with my editing, so my mum doesn't have to support me as much. Also, I get extra time, so I get an extra 6 months to submit my PhD. For other students, they get extra time for their exams and extra time for handing in assignments. So as long as you've had that diagnosis and you've got that piece of paper, you get a lot of support once you're in higher education, if you're lucky enough to get there. But once you move into the workplace, there is no support. And that's the issue at the moment. And if you can't diagnose, if you can't disclose because of fear or anxiety, or you're worried about what people are going to say, then you're constantly in fear of what people are going to think if you can't meet the expectations of your employer. And so there becomes this mismatch because your employer thinks you should be at a certain level, and if you're not meeting that expectation, then performance management can come in. And so people are constantly having to hide it all the time. For me, since I found out I was dyslexic and have dysgraphia, I've always disclosed to my employer, especially after how I was treated in my graduate year and I didn't know what was wrong with me. But I normally at least wait 3 months to show that I'm competent in my job before I say that I'm dyslexic. But it's private for everyone, it's an individual choice, and there's always that risk that if you disclose, you may be discriminated against and you can possibly lose your job. So all of these issues can lead to poor mental health and well-being, but also it can impact in the workplace. So people can be more reliant on their colleagues or family and friends. So my mum does a lot of my editing work for me. I have colleagues at work that help me as well. So my managers will help edit my work before I submit it up to my executive. But also the physical environment can be really hard for us. So as we talked about before, background noise, a lot of organisations now expect you to work in an open planned office, and so that can be really challenging for you if you've got report writing due or if there's a lot of noise. And even writing an email can take me an hour if it's something that's really important and I have to send it out to someone. And that's a long time to write just one email if you're in a really busy work environment. So all of these issues and day-to-days, we talk about that it's a reading disorder, but it has so many different impacts on a person's life. And so this can all lead to feelings of frustration, anxiety, shame and guilt. If you're having to hide something all the time, it's really exhausting. You can be scared if you've got to have to stand up in front of an audience like right now and you can't have your notes and you've got to rejig everything so you can have your notes. If you've got to write on the whiteboard or the blackboard and people see your handwriting and you've got bad handwriting and then you can't spell as well. And so if you can't disclose this and then you've got to try and cover it up, it can be extremely anxiety provoking for people. So if dyslexia is left unidentified or unassisted, it can have huge consequences for people's quality of life outcomes, which can lead to poorer access to education and employment, financial, and then distressingly at the moment there's a higher representation in the justice system. And this is across the world, between 20 to 40% of people are ending up in the justice system. So even though we talk about the strengths, and there are a lot of the dyslexic advantage that we see published, and it's great that we have so many people like Richard Branson and Jamie Oliver out there presenting how we can draw on those strengths that we have as dyslexics. We also have to think about the other aspect that so many other people are going through. And if you think of that percentage of people just in the justice system, it's not a strength and it's not a gift for everyone. I definitely don't see it as a gift. I've seen it as a daily struggle. I call my mum constantly crying. I call my sister constantly lost, and she then gets constantly frustrated with me. So it doesn't just impact on the individual, it impacts on the family and also the community. Sorry, I wish I had a glass rather than a bottle. So all the challenges I've faced throughout my work history, which has been quite long now, and what I was starting to see through other people that I met, because when I was diagnosed with dyslexia, I didn't know what it was, even though I was a speechy. We weren't really taught much about dyslexia as speech pathologists. And so when I went home and said to my family, I'm dyslexic, we all said, well, so what? What does that mean? And so really for me, I wasn't dyslexic until I was 27, because that's when my dyslexic journey began. And so in 2015, I established the Dear Dyslexic Foundation, and it was created through podcasts, and the name came about through, instead of having a Dear Diary, it was around Dear Dyslexia and diarising our lived experiences of dyslexia orally rather than through the written form. And so now what we do is we're sharing stories that empower people and allow us to share our lived experience for the first time, because we've never had a voice in Australia for young people and adults to share their experiences. So there's a number of things that we do at the foundation. Our biggest objective is raising awareness, because there's not enough awareness of dyslexia, whether it's for children, young people or adults. And so for us, we do that through our podcasts, through coming to speak at events like this today, through our website and through resources that we have on the website as well. There's different fact sheets that help educators working with students through to employers working with their employees. Our podcasts, we just released our 24th podcast last week, and we've had over 5,000 downloads now, and they're listened to internationally, and we're just rated as one of the top 10 podcasts in the world to listen to for 2019, which we were really, really excited about. We've got a variety of speakers, from Jackie French to Catherine Devaney, so we've got authors, actors, and what I call everyday garden variety dyslexics like myself, just sharing their lived experiences of dyslexia, so their successes and their challenges. We run training, so face-to-face workshops across the country, targeting upper secondary school, higher education and in the workplace, and that's really to upskill teachers and employers and those working with those that have dyslexia, so they've got the skills needed to then empower their students and employees to reach their full potential. We're soon to be launching webinars as well, so that more people can access the training that they need, and topics will be around like social and emotional wellbeing, study skills. And the advantage of running webinars is that we're able to access people internationally from all around the world, so we're bringing in the most up-to-date experts in the field that we're now able to access in Australia. Assessment and support services. So for me, this was really important, because when I was assessed, I was given a 10-page report which I couldn't really digest. It was explained to me in an hour. I had about 5 recommendations, and 3 of them really stood out to me. One was get some phonics training, get a new job and get a psychologist. After going through a severe mental health breakdown, I already had a psychologist. Phonics training I didn't really feel would be very beneficial for me at the age of 27. I already had a tutor that helped me through university, and I didn't want a new job. I'd spent 4 years training as a speech pathologist. I'd spent another 2 years doing my master's, and I loved working in health, and I wanted to keep working in the health industry. So to be told then, after spending 7 years of training, to go and find a new career, plus my massive HECS debt, was really frustrating and upsetting, and going through a marriage breakup was just another thing I couldn't even come to terms with. How could I now find another job? So at the foundation, what we want to be able to do is if someone comes to us and they have an assessment, they're able to get recommendations that really support their needs at the time in their life. So if they're a student, that we're able to give them recommendations that support them for their studies, or if they're coming through as an adult and they're working, how do we put in those assisted accommodations for them so that they're able to get the support they need in the workplace. We also have tutoring and mentoring, so people can access our tutoring virtually. So our tutors are based in Queensland, but it's a virtual system, so people can log on anywhere, anytime, and access tutoring, whether it's trying to get your licence, study skills, or some support within the workplace. And we've also been given a small grant to develop a mentoring program, and that's really looking at an 8-week course where you can access another dyslexic who can help you through your whatever stage of life it might be. So if it's extra support studying, or if you're wanting to transition back into study or into a different role, that you've got some mentoring support to help you get through that. Last but not least, everything should be based around research, as Rhonda was talking about before. And for us, it's really important. And so for me, because I didn't think that I'd done enough study, I decided I should go and do my doctorate as well. And so we wanted everything at the foundation to be as evidence-based as possible. I think I tell my supervisors I am the worst student possible because I'm not there very often, but we can only do our best. And for me, I partnered with La Trobe University. They're kind enough to be helping me do this research. And because dyslexia affects all aspects of our lives, and what's really coming out is that it really impacts our social and emotional well-being. And so this is the first component of my study that I've been looking at. It's been a survey sent across the country, so it's the first Australian survey of its kind, or study of its kind. You had to have a formal diagnosis, because again, if we don't have our formal diagnosis, then how can we advocate for funding? How can we advocate for policy change? So we had 65 people that ended up having that formal diagnosis that participated in it, and it was a standardised assessment that was undertaken through a survey. Sorry I can't read this very well, but from the survey, 73% of participants had lower than average mental health and wellbeing outcomes, which was not surprising to see, but still pretty sad to see. Some of the questions we looked at as well is that 62% lacked self-confidence and 66% didn't feel very good about themselves, and 73% had little to no energy to spare, like Rhonda was talking about before, about children becoming very tired. So for me, this just shows that there's a lot of work to be done around looking at people's mental health and well-being, and how what I was talking about before is in the workplace, if you're constantly having to cover up your dyslexia, you can't disclose it, you're not getting any support, you could see how people's overall mental health and well-being can be impacted. But what was good to know is that 90% of people disclose to their family, which isn't surprising if it's genetic, and a lot of us have it within our family. 80% were happy to talk to their friends about it, and 57% were disclosing in the workplace. So there is some discussion happening out there. These are just preliminary findings. It hasn't been written up yet or published, so I'm just starting to do that work now with La Trobe University. So how can you support people in the workplace? It's very much like how you would support all your other staff. It's best practice for everyone in the workplace. Flexibility is the key, letting people work from home if they need to, checking in regularly with people to make sure they're okay, they're not being overloaded. It's very much the same as in the school. Checking in with your students, making sure they're not overloaded. I don't think you can have flexibility of sending them home to do their work though. I don't know, maybe that's a new way of thinking. Peer support in school, having peer support, and also in the workplace. So for me, I have a lot of peer support because I'm lucky enough to be able to disclose. I'm able to have networks of people that are happy to help me in the workplace. And it's an exchange. I do things for them, they edit my work, and so it works really well. And there's always someone that really is happy to help out. Down the bottom is my wish list. As I said to my mum today, I really want an executive assistant. My mum is my executive assistant. She edits all my work for me, though she's very overloaded with her own job. But I couldn't get by without her. I really wouldn't be where I am today without her. But as people progress up the career ladder, different opportunities like having an executive assistant, some of these things are so simple for people that really ensures that they can exceed in their job. Literacy support is something everybody needs. Everybody's literacy levels are different within an organisation depending on what access we've had to an education. Not everyone comes through with a university degree. We have Grammarly at my organisation, which is just blanket, everybody gets it. So I don't know if anyone's heard of Grammarly here. No? Mainly only the dyslexic people. So it's a fantastic resource. There's a free version of it, and then there's a licensed version. So at my work, all the staff have the free version, and then the managers have the licensed version. And it's like the next step up from spell check on Word, and it just proofreads checks all your grammar for you, which Word wouldn't do. The only thing is it hyphenates everything, so you just have to double check that. And if you're dyslexic and you don't know where the hyphen goes, then that can be a little bit challenging. But it helps everyone, and then no one needs to know if you're dyslexic or not. No fear of being exposed to your dyslexia. Considering pressure points, so making sure that people don't have to stand up in front of big audiences if they don't feel comfortable, or if they do have to, that they've got plenty of time to prepare. Making sure people don't have to stand up on the whiteboard, whether it's at school or whether it's in the workplace, can be very anxiety-provoking. I had someone call me on our helpline asking what they could do because they're a manager and they don't want to have to get up and write on the whiteboard in front of their staff, and what could they do to reduce that, or how could they help with their anxiety to manage it. And then focusing on strengths. If we focus on strengths, we have a better team ethic, we're more compassionate, and we're more tolerant of people's differences. But if we come from a strength-based approach, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in the workplace, then that's advantageous for everybody, because we don't need to be focusing on people's disadvantages or their disabilities all the time. We should be focusing on what people can do, because that way we're able to achieve a better outcome. Nobody's perfect. We all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses, whether we have a disability or not. So what does it mean to be a dyslexic disruptor? I didn't want to be a dyslexic disruptor. I wanted to have a voice for other people. From a young age, I was raising funds, I think, from grade 2, with a little money box in the playground for people in Africa who were starving, if you remember the World Vision ads back then. But what I've come to learn is that you have to be able to have a voice for yourself before you can have a voice for other people. And through my journey, I've learnt that I've had to have a voice, because if I didn't have a voice to protect myself, then I would have ended up still in that deep, dark black hole that I was 13 years ago. And so because of that, I've now become a dyslexic disruptor. And we call ourselves that because there are a lot of people out there advocating for their children, which is fantastic. We need it. You know, if children don't get intervention now, they're not going to get they might have the opportunities that they should be getting. But we need young people and adults now having a voice as well. So we're all dyslexic disruptors and champions. So if you'd like to help us be dyslexic disruptors, there's a number of ways. You can join our networks. We're on social media everywhere. You can help promote and listen to our podcasts. There's a variety of podcasts, whether you've got children or whether you're an adult with dyslexia. We run campaigns during National Dyslexic Awareness Month, which is coming up in October, where for some reason we have a whole month. Most places just have, organisations have one day, but we're lucky enough to have a whole month. So we run morning teas, we have free resources that you can disseminate during October, and we also have now an annual gala. So we talked about resilience before, and building resilience from a young age so that by the time we become adults, we're strong and empowered and we're able to reach our full potential. So in October we run our national gala in Melbourne, and we normally have a guest speaker that comes to share their lived experience of having dyslexia, and it also helps raise funds so that we can continue the work that we do, because the majority of it is voluntary at the moment. And last but not least, even though I was shortlisted for Telstra Business of the Year, I've recently been nominated for 2 awards through a program that I'm currently in, so I was going to do a little bit of spruiking for myself. And that there's an opportunity to vote for me, but it's not really about me, it's about raising the awareness and raising the profile of dyslexia within our communities, because our first step is really increasing that awareness raising so that all of us that have dyslexia can have healthier, happier and more connected lives. So thank you.
Awesome.